The Rose Tree Tavern is significant. It was important to save this tavern because it's one of the few examples of an early rural tavern that's still standing. The tavern itself dates all the way back to the early 1700s. It was founded on what was then known as the Providence Road. And unlike today, where we can travel from one town to another in a very short amount of time, sometimes a trip to the ports in Chester was an overnight trip and travelers needed a place to stay. From the 1970s all the way up until 2004, there have been movements going on to move the tavern. So it's taken almost 30 years to get the tavern moved to its new location.
Hi, I'm Christopher Linton with LRS Construction. In March of 2003, our company was awarded the Delaware County contract to relocate the Rose Tree Tavern. Now, because there was considerable public interest in the project, and it's been in the planning stages for over 20 years, we wanted to make a video to document how the job was done. Now, we were just one piece of a team of engineers and architects and designers that put together the plan for the move of the building. We're going to pick up filming about a month into the process as excavation was ongoing and the site was being prepared for the eventual move of the tavern. A project of this size, well over 10,000 cubic yards of excavation, with all the soil stockpiled on site, it's very important to contain that soil so there's no runoff into the tributaries and the streams in the area. The entire perimeter of this stockpile of soil has a 3-foot silt fence all the way around, and in some places where it might be vulnerable, it's doubled up, and we have straw bales as well. So far we're in good shape here. We've had some heavy rains, haven't had any problems at all. As you can see here, we're well into the excavation for the new location for the tavern. What's going on is that we have triaxle trucks bringing in 3A modified stone, which acts as a sub-base for a new road that's coming in off of the access road over there. That stone will be spread and compacted onto this black fabric, which is a geotextile mesh that helps to stabilize the sub-base below it. All the excavation we've done is to create the proper height for the new tavern location. We've dug a 3-foot deep, 5-foot wide footing trench that mirrors the outside walls and the bearing points of the tavern. Into this trench, we're pouring about 150 cubic yards of 4,000 psi high-strength concrete. The footing is also reinforced with rebar mats. The Komatsu excavator we have here is continuing to work up the slope towards the tavern. He's going to excavate all the way around the building, good 6 or 8 feet below the threshold levels that you see there, roughly in level with the inside basement floor. At that point, the house mover will be able to come in and start sliding his steel beams in to create a grid, a steel grid to support the building. And the building will be put on trucks and rolled down the incline to its new location. We're going to go take a look at the building now and see some of the measures that we've taken to stabilize the structure before its eventual move. We'll probably spend the better part of 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, stripping all the old mortar out, repointing the entire building, removing the windows as you can see, stabilizing the building and lightening it so it doesn't weigh any more than it has to, and it's as strong and has as much structural integrity as possible before it's actually strapped together and moved down this slope. So we'll come over here and take a look at some of the work that we've done so far. You can see that the building itself is actually 2 different structures. There's a clear line down the middle, and they're not joined together. In other words, the stone from one half isn't really meshed with the stone from the other half, so we do have to regard it almost as 2 separate structures. The right side being the older side and the left side being a newer addition. Over here on the Route 252 side, you can see the masons have their scaffold up. They've already infilled 2 of the windows with concrete block. Down in the lower section here, you can see that they've chipped out all the mortar. They go back 3 inches to the stone, remortar, repoint the entire building. This will happen both inside and out of the structure. What we're finding is that the mortar, especially deeper into the stone, very unstable. It's broken down a lot over time. This is a serious project in here, stabilizing the building. As we go through the entire structure, we're stripping the plaster off the walls, taking off any of the moldings and the casings. All the mechanicals are coming out of the building, again, to lighten as much as possible and to make sure that there's no surprises. Well, as we've gotten into this building, there have been a lot of surprises. And we have issues with structural beams that are splitting. In some cases, they're broken completely in half. So we're marking areas of concern that need to be addressed structurally before we can even consider moving the building. Still an old mantle in place with some of the old the tile work. This room is a good example of some of the structural work that needs to be done to the building. When we took the ceiling out in the plaster system, we revealed that this 4-inch cast iron waistline, which is obviously added much later in the building. In order to install that waistline for the bathroom upstairs, the plumbers at the time just cut right through this joist there. So there's not much integrity left. We're going to obviously take out all the cast iron, take out the copper feeds, any of the other electric that you see, replace that beam entirely. It's interesting to note right next to it is an actual hand-hewn piece of lumber. It still resembles the tree that it was cut from, except there's no bark on it. They flattened out one side. That's virtually the only thing holding up a stone wall, the gable end wall that runs over my head about 15 feet right to the roof line. So we're going to have to do something to stabilize this section so it doesn't move. This room, it's sort of an ongoing process. We're going to be stripping all the plaster off the walls and again stabilizing all the pointing. Here we're dug back 3-4 inches. We'll use pneumatic guns to the air pressure system, blow all the dust out of here and repoint all the walls. This was an old fireplace and it was determined that it wasn't worth saving and the added weight was going to be a problem. So we've actually spent a couple of days getting the old fireplace out of here. Interestingly, it was also installed at the time without any foundation underneath it. It's just bearing right on the floor joist, which is a concern. It's always running the risk of the possibility of this thing falling right through the floor when we try to move the building. Well, we're down in the basement. Again, we have some joists in place that are just merely pieces of tree that were cut and flattened on one side. This one actually still has the bark on it. You can see that this steel beam, which is working to support a lot of these joists and take the spring out of the floor, is bearing on it just an undersized little lintel over that opening over there. So that's going to have to be addressed. Let's go outside to take a look at how we supported the intersection to allow us to excavate around the building. We've driven the sheet pilings which support the intersection, support the road. The elevation for the road is about 8 to 10 feet above this sheer wall. Once the sheet piles were in, we were able to excavate around the building so Steve would have access to it and he can start running his steel through the foundation. And as he put the steel in, he starts taking away the foundation so get to the point where it's completely self-supported. Right in this location, before we started driving these piles, it was determined that there was an old 8-inch high-pressure water line that wasn't marked on the drawing. So that line had to be relocated, which basically stopped us for 3 or 4 weeks before we could drive these piles. It was a terracotta line, probably been there for 60, 80 years. And it was about a foot behind these piles. It was guaranteed that if we started driving piles anywhere near it, it would break and flood this entire area. So that was one of the things we had to deal with before we got to this point. Well, the most exciting part of this project is the actual moving of the building. Let's talk to our subcontractor, Steve Dziuba, about how he's going to get that done.
My name is Steve Dziuba, and I'm a building mover. As you can see, the house behind us. This project with the wheel steel on top of the dollies, everything included is around 832 ton. So our task is now to get it from point A to point B. Another frequent question is, how do you get the big steel beams in? Basically, it's rolling them in on rollers. Make a hole for the beam to go through the house where you want it. And once you get your holes made, then we have what we call cribbing, which is right here. You can see this underneath this big beam right here. We make a crib, and then we'll roll that beam in there on a roller. Then, of course, you get all your jacks set up, and then you lift it. It sounds simple, but there's a lot of hard work. When we put these beams in here, they were almost touching the ground, so you were crawling underneath them, over top of them. A tremendous amount of labor involved in trying to get this house up in the air. But once you get it all set up, all you do is push a lever, you look at your gauges, you can tell exactly what the house weighs. The hydraulic system is a totally unified system, and it really works wonderful. And it goes up like a feather. When we're going down the hill, it's going to be leaned something like this at a 6% grade. So we want to make sure that end wall is going to be supported properly, so we're going to go inside and cabling it back to another interior stone wall to help protect that from any chance of it to lean out. LRS dug back into that weak mortar, it's almost like clay, and they plastered this hole in. That's a crucial part of the project, is making sure that that wall stays together when we take it down the hill.
One of the critical measures that Steve has taken to stabilize the building for the move is to put steel angles on each of the four corners of the building and diagonally cable those steel angles together. This will support the building and keep it from racking.
Our plan is to get the steering gear on the dollies, and once that's done, we'll set up our trucks. And this is the grade which we're working on now to try to level it out a little bit more shallow of a grade. And eventually, you can see where that green pickup is sitting down there. That's the footer. That's where the final resting place of the house is going to be.
This is Fox 29, 10 o'clock news.
It's moving day at the Rose Tree Tavern. No, people aren't moving out. The building is actually moving over. I'm Tina Kim, and I'll explain. First, what's slower than a snail, bigger than a house, and grabbed the attention of dozens of neighbors today?
That would be the Rose Tree Tavern. After more than a year of delays, the historic building began its journey to what will hopefully be its final destination. Tina Kim was there for moving day.
At the intersection of Route 252 and Rose Tree Road, cars often exceed the speed limit. But this day, people here could see just how limited speed can be. The Rose Tree Tavern was moving, all 1.3 million pounds.
Do you, watch paint dry in your spare time?
At about 10 to 25 feet an hour.
This is exciting times for you all.
Oh yeah, it is.
With an audience to savor every snail-paced second.
I'm retired. I have nothing to do. This is wonderful.
Even if it's not as exciting as watching grass grow, people understand just what a big event this is. After all, the building has been in the same spot since Thomas Jefferson was president.
All right, so you were here when it was built.
Actually, Arthur Stetler and Tom Williams have been around to watch congestion build at this intersection. That's why the state wants to widen 252 and Rose Tree. So it's paying LRS Construction more than $1 million to move the historically registered building back from here to this hole about 200 feet away.
It was a tavern for commercial travelers when they had horse and oxen-driven teams.
I brought him out because it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
So Ted Kramer's 2-year-old grandson witnesses a piece of the past, while Ted gets help with present-day babysitting duties.
I can get him ready for a nap.
No snooze time for Delaware County's board, who still have to decide what to do with the tavern once it's in place. In Upper Providence Township, Tina Kim, Fox 29 News.
Well, it's the day of the move. The crews were all here before dawn. We have about 15 people actually working on the building, working on the block and tackle, working the excavators and the backhoes that are being used to pull the building while it's also being anchored from behind. There are 24 individual carriages, 196 wheels, carrying about 850 tons of steel and stone, downhill about 200 feet. Steve Dziuba is going to use a system of winches, high-strength steel cable, and block and pulleys to pull the building, to break it loose, to get it moving down the hill, and a similar system behind it to act as a brake to slow the building down. You can barely see the tires moving, but at 850 tons, there's considerable momentum. So Steve had to put a braking system on the backside. And that's a system of excavators, bulldozers, trees. He's tied off the trees, and that will act to slow the building down to keep it from getting away from him so he can make his adjustments and fine-tune all the way down the hill. The entire project will probably take about 14 hours, and it's a series of stops and starts to make very fine adjustments to maintain the proper aptitude of the building. During the entire course of the building's move, Steve's crew will be underneath the building, watching all the carriages, watching the pistons, the rams that are holding the building up, that have jacked the building up, making sure that none of them are coming out of plumb, making sure that everything is in perfect alignment. As soon as they see something that isn't going right, they stop, adjust all the controls, adjust the steering, and then start again. That's why moving this building will take so long. As the building's being moved, our crews are laying down solid oak timbers underneath the wheels before the building, and then picking them up after the building's passed over. Those timbers are providing a nice, solid, stable surface for the building to move on. It's very critical that as this building moves slowly down the hill, that it's kept in its proper orientation and aptitude so that the weight doesn't shift one way or the other. It's been a busy day, a lot of public interest in the project, so at any given time we've probably had 100 or 200 people around the fence line watching the building move. Well, when Steve moved the building down the hill and got it over the foundation, in order to take his wheels out, he put his cribbing back in place and his hydraulic jacks, jacked the entire building up another 2 feet. The masons are here working, bringing the foundation wall up. They're grouted solid with concrete. The process that they're going to use to finish the foundation wall is to bring the block up underneath the building in these areas that are just hanging there, self-supported. They'll come up tight underneath it, pack mortar in there, transfer the load slowly from these open areas from the steel. So they'll fill in this area, and the wall that's running back, the old gable wall, runs back. They'll go tight with the masonry up underneath there. They'll come between the bay of these steel pieces, run straight up and carry the wall there. They'll come back up, carry the wall above it, and then Steve will come back with his rollers and start pulling his steel out, and then they'll infill the foundation wall where each of the pieces of steel comes out. These interior foundations are for the various structures of the building. This is one of the chimneys that you saw from the very beginning that had the mantle and the tile around it. That's going to be built up right underneath the hearth of that chimney. When this is done, we're going to have a 9-foot basement here with a walkout doorway on the lower side. Well, it's been 2 weeks since we moved the building. Since that time, we've brought the fill up, we've removed the sheet piles, we're back up to grade of Route 252 and Rose Tree Road. We've seeded and strawed. We're going to remove the security fence pretty soon. We're taking down the Jersey barriers and the traffic attenuators, getting ready to turn this area back over to PennDOT so that they can begin their renovations and improvements of this intersection.
The tavern has been successfully relocated intact and without accidents. At present, there are no utilities or sewer lines run to the building, but plans are underway for the interior renovation. There has been some consideration to use the tavern as a historical museum or for county offices, though the final use has not been determined. The building is sealed to the weather. The concrete blocks will remain in the windows. The dormers and chimneys have been sealed off, and in many ways, the building is stronger now than any time in its history. LRS Construction would like to thank the Delaware County engineer, PennDOT, Sandra Baggett of Baggett and Bach Architects, the consulting engineers Remington and Vernick, and all those that contributed to making the relocation of the Rose Tree Tavern a success. With the building out of the way, soon PennDOT will begin the reconstruction project to improve traffic flow at the busy intersection. After over 20 years of planning and 18 months of production, the Rose Tree Tavern is now ready to begin its next life as a useful and historical asset to Delaware County.